Continuing our discussion with Chapter 9, this video looks at dollar value LIFO retail inventory method. I know that's a mouthful. We're combining a few different inventory methods here. If you don't remember RIM, or retail inventory method, this inventory method is used to estimate what ending inventory is without actually having to take a physical count. It does so by looking at two columns here. We have a retail column and we have a cost column. And our purpose of these two columns is to help us establish a relationship between the cost and the retail prices that a company might incur. So from a cost side, we typically calculate the first portion of the cost of goods sold equation, taking beginning inventory plus purchases, providing us cost of goods available for sale under cost incurred by the company. And then we do a similar calculation on the retail side, beginning inventory plus purchases, but this time at retail prices. In other words, what the company would sell to a customer. And this produces us cost of goods available for sale, or really what you could say is retail goods available for sale. And then we take a relationship between these two. So what is, we'll call this number one and number two. So what is cost of goods available for sale? 1 divided by cost of goods available for sale, 2 under the retail. And this produces for us this cost to retail percentage or ratio. And then that's ultimately used to help us estimate what ending inventory and cost of goods sold is going to be under the cost side of the calculation, because eventually we are going to take out sales, and this would provide us with ending inventory estimated at retail prices, and then we multiply that ending inventory at retail prices times this percentage to give us an estimate at ending inventory at cost, which is an estimate, which then goes in over to here. We subtract out that from the cost of goods available for sale, and this provides us our estimate of cost of goods sold. This is the general process, and there's some more specifics that are added in. We learned multiple different RIM examples last class period, where you could look at average cost RIM, you could look at conventional RIM, you could look at LIFO RIM. All of those have some intricacies in them, as well as what we'll mention here, where we have things like markups and markdowns over here in just a moment. So the idea is the general process is for us to create these two sort of columns, calculating first retail side, then calculating cost side as an estimate. With that in mind, this video is looking at dollar value LIFO RIM. And so really what we're doing is we're taking the concepts of LIFO RIM and combining it with something we learned in Chapter 8, which is dollar value LIFO. The idea with dollar value LIFO is when you have LIFO in general, the acronym stands for last in, first out, meaning that the goods that you assume to be sold as part of cost of goods sold are the last ones that came in. The problem with that is that when you don't sell through all of your goods, you could create layers. So for instance, if you have a good, let's say, 5 goods here at $5 a piece, and you have 5 goods here at $6 a piece, and you have 5 goods here at $7 a piece. Well, if you sell, let's say, 12 goods, then LIFO assumes that the last ones in were the first ones out. So these ones are sold, and 2 of these are sold, leaving you with a remainder of 3 goods on hand. Well, when you go into the next year to forecast sales again, you then say, well, we need to purchase some more goods. We're not going to sell just 3. So let's say you purchase, 10 more. And now you're at a price of $8. What happens if you don't sell through all those goods? What happens if instead you sell through, let's say, only 8 of them? Well, now you're left with not 10, but 2 at $8. And remember that you still have this layer of 3 goods at $5. Notice, because we have different prices here, if we were to just look at the cost or the price value of inventory, we wouldn't be able to tell if we actually have an increase in inventory because of the number of units or just the dollar value. Because notice that the dollar value has now changed. So LIFO, dollar value LIFO, attempts to remove that ambiguity and instead examine the value of inventory at base year prices. And it does so by considering the retail price index, or at least it does under RIM. We might have a cost index as well if we were just considering dollar value LIFO, which we learned in chapter 8. But here, since we're using RIM, it's a retail price index. Okay, so let's look at what that looks like. Here we have an example of dollar value LIFO RIM. We're given information on both the retail side and the cost side. Our first step is going to be to calculate the goods available for sale under retail and the goods available for sale under cost. Now remember, we're combining the method that we used under LIFO RIM with dollar value LIFO. And if you remember our previous discussions about LIFO RIM says that the layers that we create aren't necessarily equal to one another in terms of their cost to retail relationship. Remember, you can see that over here. The cost to retail relationship is different. Here we have $5 is what our costs were, then $8. So what do you think we were selling goods for? We might have been selling them over in the beginning layer at $7, and now we might be selling them for $10, right? So the cost to retail relationship can be different. So what LIFO RIM says is we must split up the beginning inventory and the additional purchases here. We have to split those up to get a different cost to retail relationship for both of them. That's just standard LIFO RIM methodology. So we calculate a cost to retail relationship for beginning inventory and a cost to retail relationship for purchases or goods available for sale excluding beginning inventory. So you can see those calculations here. And again, we won't go over this too much because we did these in previous class periods, but we take our cost for beginning inventory divided by our retail at beginning inventory, and that produces one cost to retail relationship. And then we take cost at purchases divided by the retail for purchases, and this gives us a new relationship. So now we have those. Our next step in LIFO RIM, and again, this is just still straightforward LIFO RIM, was for us to calculate the goods available for sale both under the retail and the cost. So now we add in beginning inventory plus the purchases, and this provides us with our goods available for sale. Our next step, we do that on both sides for both cost and retail. Our next step is then to subtract out sales. Again, this is still following the LIFO RIM format. We haven't done yet dollar value. There's nothing we've changed yet from what we've learned in previous class periods. So we subtract out sales, and this provides us with our ending inventory at retail prices right now. Here's where the change comes in. It comes in right when we're calculating this figure right here. The estimated ending inventory at cost, we now have to change a little bit. Remember, dollar value LIFO says we have situations where we can simply have inflation in the retail prices. So in order to compare true apples to apples, in order to compare our change in the inventory level in terms of quantity, but by looking at it in terms of value, we must revert back to base year prices. So in order to do that, notice we calculated ending inventory right here at retail prices at $198. What we're going to do is take that $198, and here's where the dollar value piece comes in. Take that $198 and divide by the retail price index. And in chapter 8, we talked about where indices can come from. Right now, you can assume that that's given for you. So we take $198 divided by the retail price index, and this produces for us the ending inventory at retail prices at base year prices. So not retail prices at current year prices, but retail prices at base year prices, so that we can compare beginning inventory in Apple to the purchases in Apple to determine if there's a true layer that's added due to quantity change. That's what we're trying to get at with dollar value LIFO. So in looking at this, we say we have 180,000 as ending inventory at retail prices at base year prices. We then say, okay, beginning inventory was 160, and that has its own cost to retail relationship. Then we say we had an ending inventory at retail prices at 180, so the difference is a $20,000 layer. So now what we're going to do is multiply each of the layers by their retail price index, and then multiply them by their cost to retail ratios. Notice we calculated those right over here, cost to retail ratios. This then gives us, when we sum these two up, our estimated ending inventory at cost, and that is plugged in here. We take the goods available for sale minus the ending inventory cost estimate, and that gives us cost of goods sold. This is dollar value LIFO Rim. In other words, we're combining both the dollar value LIFO concepts we discussed in Chapter 8 with the Rim concepts that we discussed in Chapter 9. And understand that it's not until we get to here that it actually is any change from what we learned in LIFO Rim. Okay, now this assumes that we just have a 1 year sort of instance. What happens when we go to the second year? So let's assume that we go through this entire process apart from this right here, go through this entire process, and we calculate ending inventory at retail prices of $226 for the following year. So same sort of process we went through, but now we're at the following year. All right, first step that we did, if we're implementing dollar value, we divide by the retail price index. This produces for us $195 retail price of ending inventory at base year prices. We then split this out among its layers. Remember, we had beginning inventory layer at $160. That was given to us right up here. We also had a 20,000 layer that we calculated last year. We calculated that layer right here. We then have a new layer because that's 180, and we were left with 195 in this calculation. We then have a new layer of 15,000. Again, what's our process? Multiply by the retail price indices for each one of the applicable layers, and then multiply by the ratio, the cost to retail ratio for each one of the applicable layers. Notice it tells us that when we're in the subsequent year, we calculated cost to retail percentage of 63%, which just follows the same sort of process that we had right here. Calculate for the new layer, the cost to retail relationship here. Sum them up, and this gives us our new estimated ending inventory for cost. Now, what happens instead if we were to not have the 226 in the second year, but instead we had 204, 160? Well, when we do that same sort of process, notice we're left with ending inventory at retail prices at base year prices of 176. Well, 176 doesn't even cover the 180 that we had last year. So notice the 180 is what we had last year. In other words, we've sold through part of our layer, is what we're saying right here. So in order to take that into consideration, we go through and again map out the pieces, last in, first out, right? We map out the pieces that relate to each layer. So with this 176, we account for the 160 that we had, and then we go to the next year, and we had only 16,000 to get to the 176. Even though we had a layer of 20,000, we sold through part of it. We have nothing in this last layer because last in, first out. So those were the first ones that were sold. So then we go through the same process of multiplying by our retail price indices and multiplying by our cost to retail relationship. Notice that there is no layer added in this last one. Last in, first out, sum these up, and this becomes our cost estimate for ending inventory. And then again, don't forget, once we calculate that, we plug that in and calculate cost of goods sold. All right, let's go ahead and try applying this problem. You can pause this, try this, we'll come back and solve it together. Okay, this problem says on January 1st, 2021, the Bowdoin Corporation adopted dollar value LIFO retail inventory method. Below is the information related to this. The retail price indice at the end of the year is 1.04. Ending inventory at dollar value LIFO cost is. All right, our first step that we said was for us to calculate the goods available for sale and calculate the cost to retail relationship, the ratio. Notice that there's two ratios that we have here for LIFO. We have the beginning inventory, so we'll just divide cost by the retail that we have here, and this produces for us 63.83%. And then we'll also do it for purchases. They don't give us markups or markdowns. It's a little bit more straightforward than the problem that we had here. There's no net markups or markdowns. So we can just take the purchases cost divided by retail, and this gives us 65% here. So now we have our cost to retail relationships. So our next step is going to be for us to calculate what our goods available for sale are less our net sales at the retail side. And this is going to give us ending inventory. So essentially what we can do is take 94,000 plus 310, and we could calculate a goods available for sale piece at this point. This gives us 404. Then we're going to subtract out our net sales, 300. This is at retail prices again still. This gives us 104. This 104 is our estimate of ending inventory at current year retail prices. Now, we're doing dollar value LIFO, so we've got to convert this into our base year prices. So to do that, we're going to take 104,000 and we're going to divide by the retail price index, which is 104 or 1.04. This produces for us 100,000. This 100,000 is our retail ending inventory estimate at base year prices. So now that we have this 100,000, we're going to split this out among our beginning inventory at retail price as well as our purchases that we had throughout the year. So our beginning inventory was 94,000. Our purchases then throughout the year to get this additional layer would have to be 6, just the 100,000 minus the 94,000. Now that we have these split out, we're going to multiply them, and I'm going to give myself some room, so I'm going to change this for just a second. Okay, now we're going to multiply this by the indices that are applicable for each one. The base year, or the beginning inventory, I should say, is always going to be 1. It's going to be the always assumed to be the base year. And then the new layer is going to be at 1.04, which is told to us right over here. Then we also have to multiply by the cost to retail relationship. Beginning inventory had this relationship. Purchases had this relationship. So we'll have 63.83 here and 65% here. That provides us with 60,000 and 4,056. So now we're going to sum these up and we get 64,056. This provides us with answer C. Now, this is essentially our estimate of ending inventory at cost. If we wanted to solve for cost of goods sold, we would take beginning inventory plus purchases, subtract out this, and that would provide us with cost of goods sold. But we weren't asked to do that in this problem, so we'll pause there.